Hello and welcome to the Rugby Ruckus, another video podcast. We are video podcast now. Of course, you can hear us on Spotify or any of your podcast channels, but you can watch us on YouTube and subscribe there. And it's a very special event today because we've been trying for a while to get this guy on. And I'm going to throw to Morgan Turinui to introduce our special guest, but I'm pretty sure if you're watching, you can see who it is.
Yeah, I must admit it's the most nervous I've ever been on our podcast, Benny. I actually went out and trained this morning because just in case he was going to ask me if I'd trained today, so I went and had a run this morning so I don't have to lie. But yeah, mate, we're actually pretty honoured to get Eddie Jones on, former Matto High School boy, good Randwick man, won a plethora of premierships there, and obviously coached me at the Wallabies, successful at the Brumbies, coached the Reds, has coached all around the country, and obviously been a great Australian coaching export, not just at World Cup time, but all around the world. And one of our proud exports, Eddie Jones. Thanks for coming on, Beaver.
Thanks, boys. Cheers. Pleasure to be here. You're looking fit too, mate.
Thanks. You're a good liar. Thank you. Seriously, this
I thought he was talking about me.
I must say, this lockdown's been great. We've been training with the kids. It's been good. It's the best I've felt. I might have a sneaky run in fourth grade for Randwick this year with Fryer and Hoyles and a few of the boys.
Might go well, mate.
Yeah,
that's it. Now, Eddie, how are you travelling, mate? You're bunkered down in Japan at the moment. How's the lockdown been for you in the role that you play as England coach?
Well, it hasn't really changed a lot. In fact, we've probably had more time with the players than we normally have. You know, once the Six Nations finishes, they go back to their clubs. So our contact is absolutely minimal. And because they're in lockdown, we've organised a few things for them, some Zoom training and some Zoom meetings. So, you know, obviously frustrating, but you put everything in perspective, you know, we haven't got too much to complain about.
Is it personally frustrating, mate? You famously have talked about, you know, how organised you are, or it's been reported how organised you are and how you like to, you know, structure things right. This is very different for you, surely.
Yeah. Well, you just got to accept what the situation is. You know, we'd like to be going, obviously, to Japan in July and play a couple of tests, but that looks highly unlikely at this stage. So we just got to wait and see. We had a bit of a meeting today about what the regulations and precautions will be once we get back. So, you know, as they're all talking about, there's going to be a new way of doing things, and we've just got to learn pretty quickly and adapt.
Of course. Now, Eddie, the way that we're approaching our podcast at the moment, clearly there's no footy, but, you know, a couple of weeks' time we might be talking footy again. But for now, you know, Morgan and I have been really wanting to talk to smart and experienced rugby people to understand, you know, what this crisis means. You know, our position is that we think there's opportunity in this crisis. And right now, I don't know if you read the papers from Australia, but there's a lot of noise in Australian rugby around the departure of the CEO. You know, the state of the books. There's a whole lot on the table. Now, Morgan and I have been saying that surely crisis is a time of opportunity. Looking at rugby worldwide, there's a lot going on, not just from the pandemic, clearly, but the World Rugby elections with Bill Beaumont coming back in. There's been a lot of talk the last couple of years from rugby as a whole that there's change needed, or that there's change coming. What do you think this pandemic means for rugby more broadly? Eddie, do you think there's a bit of an opportunity here?
Yeah, well, I think for rugby globally, I think the word I like to use is equilibrium, that we're going to get back to a steady state. And I think, you know, rugby's been inflated by television money because it's been a popular sport on television, and it's probably become a little bit bloated. And I think now's the opportunity to firstly have a look at the calendar, see how we can get the calendar better, because the calendar's just sort of blossomed since rugby first went professional in '96, and now's a chance to look at where the game is strong, how can we maximise that, and make sure we look at the bottom end of the rugby community as well, and try to fit it all together. Because I think, you know, one of the important things is for rugby to keep that connection between the professional game and the amateur game, as hard as it is.
Mm. Eddie, I've heard you talk previously, and I've gone back and watched a few of your previous chats around things, and you've talked before about players in particular, and you've talked about how, you know, they've got strengths and weaknesses, and people often focus too much on the weaknesses. Is there something in that for rugby globally, in that, you know, it's had a certain structure around its you know, its tier ones and its tier twos, and we have to look very carefully at where the strengths might actually be?
Yeah, no, I think you're 100% right, mate. Yeah, let's look at the strengths of the game. It's it is a global game. You know, look, apart from the major sports, apart from football, we're probably the most global sport. So we've got a really good chance to drive that. You know, see what's happened with Japan, having had some success, and now the World Cup, that they're now, you know, a country that everyone wants to play against. If we can do that to 2 or 3 more countries in the next period of time, you know, it's only going to help grow the game.
Absolutely. Now, I want to get into the conversation in Australia. And Morgs, I might just ask you to give Eddie a bit of perspective on what it's like. Morgs is the head coach at Randwick, mate, these days. He's also the general manager of the Classics. Morgs, how's the Australian rugby community sort of travelling at the moment? There's a lot going on, and we're hoping to get back on the field soon.
Yeah, there's a few different things going on, as there always is in Australia. Obviously, the community game, so many clubs, whether it's, you know, country competitions, Shoot Shield, Hospitals Cup, everyone's trying to get their footy back, and also trying to find who can play. In Shoot Shield, is it going to be 1st to 4th grade and 3 colts, or is it going to be a shortened season with less teams? What will happen in the country where there's a fair bit going on elsewhere in their lives as well? So it's, how do we get rugby back on the field? And then what will professional rugby look like from here to the end of the broadcast agreement? And what will it look like without crowds? Do the Western Force come in? So there's a state of flux at the moment, and at the same time, there's been that leadership changes as well. Who's had their hands on the steering wheel? Who's been managing our relationship with World Rugby with these whole elections going? Who's been managing our relationship with the broadcasters, and also the government relationships right now with COVID, and also with, truthfully, the worst kept secret in the world is that our big crack at having the 27 World Cup in Australia as almost a saviour to the game, the financial sustainability of the game and the future of the game. So there's all these things going on at the same time. It's interesting that, you know, we talk about rugby globally in a really good place. I'm interested to see what Eddie thinks. Japan was probably the last frontier we got to. Is the US the logical next frontier? The global health of the game is actually pretty good. If, you know, the top tier teams, as they continue to be financially sustainable, how much can we help the in inverted commas tier 2 teams and countries come through? Where does Australia sit in that? We're a waning tier 1 team at the moment. So will we miss the boat as it goes away, or do we need a helping hand, or we just need to find out what's the best way to have a successful Wallabies, a strengthening participation level in the game, and what is a really difficult participation sport to have as an adult. It's not an easy game to play, rugby. It takes full commitment to play. And also, you know, what is the future of rugby in Australia? What does it look like? So it's an interesting time.
Mm-hmm. And look, and that's exactly where we want to start talking with you, Eddie. Eddie, you've coached at all levels in Australia, from Randwick, Super Rugby, Wallabies. You've seen the pathways and the structures. You've seen, I suppose, the strengths and weaknesses of Australian rugby. You know, we've got the powerful New South Wales and Queensland unions. You know, different story around the ACT, Melbourne, and and Western Force, which is obviously back on the agenda. Eddie, when you were working through that system, did you look at that system and think it could be better? Because I don't think it has changed a lot since your days in terms of the way it's been tied together, though. There's been a few attempts for national club comps or different types of club association. But what do you think around the player pathways through, particularly from a coaching perspective?
Well, I was lucky enough to come through at a club level when, you know, club rugby was strong. You know, we used to play down around. We'd get 5,000 down there on a Saturday afternoon, and it was, you know, one of the biggest games in town. But that's obviously fallen away because of Super Rugby, and Super Rugby for a period was massively successful. You know, a lot of my mates are rugby league supporters, and during that time when Super Rugby was Super 12, it was a short competition. The best players were playing against the best. It was great for rugby. It helped grow rugby, and I think it helped the Wallabies be successful for a period of time, because we had our best players playing for 3 teams, so they weren't too spread out. There was strong competition. If you were a club player to get in a Super Rugby side, you had to really work hard to get in. And I think that drove competition, drove desire, and it was really healthy. But, you know, like all things, it changes. Super Rugby went from 3 to 5, probably wasn't in the best decisions of Australian rugby. And it helped probably loosen the club competition. So now's the opportunity now to get club rugby strong and then get the top end of the game strong. Because if you can get the base of the game right, which is the club rugby, and then you get the top level right, then the middle will work out pretty good. And so there's been something wrong at the bottom end of the game and the top end of the game in Australian rugby for me.
Interesting. particularly with your experience now, Japan, South Africa, England, do we have unique challenges to get that right compared to some other nations? And specifically, I mean, I see people like Ben Darwin and others, and they talk about the size of the number of teams that feed up and in, and you would have seen different nations treat that differently.
Yeah, well, I think it's completely different everywhere. And so the only model that's important is the right model for your country. You can't look at New Zealand and say New Zealand model will work in Australia because it's a different situation. Japan, it's a company structure. In South Africa, they've got great private schools that produce the players that then feed into their clubs. England's got a wide base of community rugby that then fit into almost like zonal club teams that represent a shire. And they're all different. And I think the worst thing to do is to look at another country and say, that's what we've got to do. To me, Australia's been a rugby community based on strong clubs. The strong clubs then fit into a provincial system that collects the best players. And then those provincial teams play against each other to represent the Wallabies. And it's probably, I'm going to contradict myself a little bit. It's probably not dissimilar to Ireland in that regard. And you look how successful Ireland's been in the professional era by having a good club competition, having good provincial teams. What they've got 4 provincial teams. They don't need any more that feed into the national team. And I think the solution for Australia to me, is relatively straightforward. Invest in the clubs, get the right domestic provincial competition, whether that be 3 or 4 teams, find a way of how you pay that through television, and then you'll have a strong national team.
I think interesting you mentioned Ireland there as well, because I've been reading a bit about them lately and around, that they made some choices around whether they cut teams or not. And you're right, getting that right number is absolutely key. We had Fraser Neal, former New South Wales Rugby CEO, a number of years back now on, and he talked about it as saying, you need to be able to look at a map of Australia and very clearly draw a line almost from everywhere through, up and into the Wallabies. Basically saying that if you're not getting that connection right, and I think that's what I'm hearing from you as well, then that pathway, then that it doesn't make any sense. Eddie, do you have a view on Super Rugby that I assume it's not quite front of mind for you with your focus in England, but it's served a purpose, and there's a lot of discussion now around whether that structure, with South Africa and New Zealand both being involved, let alone in a pandemic or a post-pandemic world, that might not be the best tier, that people are looking to a trans-Tasman competition, and we're hearing calls from different parts of Australia to say that we should go purely domestic. Do you have a view on what would create the best players for you if you were Wallabies coach?
Well, I can't answer on the financial aspects, but I think definitely as the national team coach, you want your best players playing together. And so to me, that's having 3 teams where there's great competition to get in those squads. You battle each other, and the best will come through. I think if you spread it out too far, you can always try to grow the game, but does that add to the national team? And at the end of the day, if the Wallabies win, people will follow rugby in Australia. There's no doubt about that. Everyone loves a winner. We've seen it with Australian cricket. The Australian cricket team finding their new culture under Justin Langer. Now everyone loves cricket in Australia. Whereas 12 months ago it was a disaster, wasn't it? The Wallabies start winning, and you need your best players competing against each other.
Absolutely. Morgs, do you think that we'd get the best out of a competition if we were just playing New Zealand?
Well, I think if our best players are playing some of the best players in the world week in, week out over a period of the year, I think it's excellent. I think, and the other thing is the financials is important. Is there enough money in the pot for a trans-Tasman competition? Who knows? Do we spread our national footprint by a national club competition? Is that the way we grow the game? Can we grow the game at the 3rd level? Can we concentrate, as the Benny Darwins and Beaver just said, can we concentrate our best players with less Super Rugby teams still playing against good teams, which is New Zealand? So the great thing about South Africa is, one, it's the great experience of playing in South Africa. It's good you're playing other different ways of playing rugby. Playing against a South African team was so different to playing a New Zealand team. So I suppose the danger almost there is playing a New Zealand style of football week in, week out in your comp. I like the fact you had to play South Africa. Now you got to play the Jaguars. Then you got to play the Sunwolves. Sunwolves play an exciting brand of different rugby that Australian teams don't always see. So you do actually have the broad spectrum of ways of playing rugby and playing Super Rugby. If we have a high concentration of our best players playing together in Super Rugby teams, perhaps we'll be more successful. And I think that, in the last 10 minutes, we've had a few harsh truths said that sometimes we don't like saying in Australia. People say, oh, it's not all about the Wallabies. It shouldn't be a Wallabies first model. And I think people point to the financial spend at the moment and say that it's a Wallabies first model. I think the harsh truth is if the Wallabies win, everything works. You win a World Cup, everything works. You host the World Cup, everything works. You beat the Lions, everything works. But I think we've talked about being Wallabies first, and there's been monetary spend on Wallabies programs, but it hasn't been efficient. It could have been better spent, better money, better invested in, whether it's talent retention, talent ID, coach development, wherever you think the money should go. I think we haven't spent the money well, but I do think that the harsh truth of rugby in Australia is that the game is healthy when the Wallabies are winning. So there has to be an element of the game when you're Rugby Australia running the game, delivering the game, that has to be about making the Wallabies successful. And if that means a high concentration of our better players are playing together, and if, Benny Darwin talks about cohesion, Eddie's talking about his best players playing together, if that's how the Wallabies win, then let's find a financially sustainable way for that to happen. And if we're worried about participation and all those numbers and whatever and national footprint, well, then perhaps, tapping into the ready-made tribalism we have at club level and giving that a national footprint, perhaps there's a way to do that. And that, for me, that could be a way of doing it with both hands, which we've struggled to do up until now.
Eddie, having coached at those different levels in Australia, and clearly things need to change, right? Everyone sees that. We've said before that, this is a crisis and there's opportunity. Having coached at those different levels, did you feel it was difficult because of the structure of Australian rugby? And I point particularly because there's talk around centralisation, right? Fraser was on here and he talked about the way that New Zealand structured themselves so that, there was more collective or cohesive control of the players and where they played, etc. Here, you've coached both New South Wales and you've coached Queensland and you've coached the Wallabies. Did you feel a different push and pull in terms of those factions or control at those levels that should be a little more structured to make them function? I don't know if I'm being clear enough with the question, but basically, did you feel that you had enough control at those different levels or enough alignment with other parts of the Australian organisations to be successful?
Yeah, well, I think it's always about having good people in the chair. You've got good head coaches at your 3 province sides. You've got a good head coach at the Wallabies, which you've got now, and they can see what's best practice for the players. If you can get them to work together, then you don't need to have central contracts. Because I think, the other part is Australia is not a centralised model for rugby. And by forcing a centralised model on Australia, be forcing something that's not natural for them. Because we are provincial in Australia. Queensland hates New South Wales. New South Wales hates Queensland. Everyone hates ACT, particularly when they were winning. And I think that's important to have that. And I think that's really good. And I don't think we need to go centralised, or Australia needs to go centralised. I think they can have strong provincial teams that are then run by good people. It's always about quality of people. Leadership's always about quality of people. You get the right people in the right position, then the game will go forward.
And I think also having read a bit of stuff you said previously, that it's about identity there too, isn't it? You talk about having a strong vision and a strong identity for teams that you manage. Yeah,
well, I think, if you look historically, Queensland always had a strong forward pack. And so they always brought hard, tough forwards. And the New South Wales was more attacking backs. And then the Brumbies tended to be a more creative team because they didn't have the talent. And so you put those 3 together, backs, running backs, tough forwards, and a bit of creative talent in the middle, then you've got a nice blend for a national team. Just look at Spain when they were at their best in football. Barcelona, Real Madrid made 90% of the side. There's examples of that around the world that shows that if the national team is made from a small number of provincial teams, you're moving in the right direction.
Eddie, one of the other pieces around this, and Morgs talks about this a fair bit, and I think there has been some movement in this direction, is not just player pathways, but coaching pathways. How much of your career had to be self sort of driven to become a coach, as opposed to in the roles that you're in now? How important is that to see an organisation really understand that you've got to coach the coaches as well?
Yeah, I think that's one thing Australian rugby's dropped the ball completely on. They've dropped the ball and the ball's been lost in the gutter somewhere. Because we were ahead of New Zealand at one stage when the game went professional in terms of coaching development. I can remember my first coaching job, which was at Randwick. I went to see Boxhead O'Shea, who was in charge of the AIS, and he had a scheme of apprenticeship coaches, and there was a bloke in there in the same board shorts as him today, Scott Wiseman, learning his craft, And they're the sort of coaches Australia produced. Guys, at an early age, they were learning the craft. You had an old guy like Boxhead, good academic guy, gave you a sound grounding in the coaching fundamentals. Then you had, we were lucky, Morgan will remember, we were lucky enough to be coached by a bloke called Bob Dwyer at Randwick, who knew a thing or two about coaching. And then we had Jeff Sale, who knew a thing or two about drinking. So it was a good combination. And that sort of intellectual property has been lost in Australia, and that's something that needs to come back. Australia needs to become the smart country in rugby.
Absolutely. Morgs, there has been some movement around coaching pathways a little bit lately. Was I correct in saying that?
Yeah, I think one, it takes funding to get those programs in place, getting the right people in place. There's a lot of people trying to do the right thing, but once again, if money's being funneled places, whether it's prop up professional game or whatever it is, or corporate expenditure at Rugby Australia, funding gets taken away from things like developing coaches. The interesting thing from some of Eddie's points as well is that that provincial rivalry and difference of opinion and difference of coaching and preparing players and things like that has been great for our rugby. But the cost to that on the governance side has been that, and we're seeing it at the moment, that it's almost split down state lines, rugby in Australia at the moment, between almost Queensland and New South Wales. We've seen the thing with Roger Davis, and then the rest of the unions coming out. It's like the provincial nature of rugby in Australia has been great for our on-field performance for a long time, especially in the 3 Super Rugby team period. But in terms of our governance, I think it's really been to our detriment. It'd be interesting with Eddie behind the scenes what relationships were like, chairman and board level, CEO. I think when O'Neill was there, he was a Wallaby head coach, had an outstanding captain in George Gregan. So the rugby stuff provincially was interesting, but how much did he see the difficulty down state lines and relationship between coach and chairman and CEO and board while he was Wallaby coach as well behind the scenes? Because we saw it a couple of things was when the players, 2003, the players didn't want to sign a participation agreement for the World Cup, and Eddie and George did a great job of that not affecting the team. And then, John O'Neill was probably a brilliant administrator, but it wasn't always the easiest man to deal with. So I'm sure there are other things always at play that hurt the game on the governance side of it as well.
I think the one thing about O'Neill, he came in, and particularly the first time, he was a breath of fresh air. I remember that statement he made. He wanted rugby union to be the #1 winner sport in Australia. And that was just inspirational, aspirational. And we had the World Cup in 2003, and we went a long way to achieving that. And I think at the moment, what we need is what Australian rugby needs is some of that. They need some of that inspiration. Aim high. Don't be afraid to fail. Australia's got good players. There's plenty of good players here, and there's plenty of good players playing overseas. So not short of good players. All those political infighting tends to go away when you start winning. And I'd just be focusing, if I was Australian rugby, focusing on winning. How can you get back winning? And Dave Rennie, as I said, will do a great job, even though he's a Kiwi.
Mate, I think you're making the news at the moment for mentioning Laurie Mains, and you've got a podcast out at the moment, the Eddie Jones Coaching Club podcast. I think you've lit up New Zealand with your Laurie Mains comments. I just want to chase that thread for a moment, Eddie. Alignment and vision. I watched a speech you made, and I think it was to Kelly and Partners Law Partners in 2014 on YouTube, and you talked in there about 80% on your core skills, and it was the other 20%. And in that, you were talking about the application of the way you approach a team to business. All right. There's always a lot of those ways that people want to understand the way you bring people together, drive common purpose for the right outcomes, and how you apply that to business. And essentially, what I'm hearing you say is, I think it lines up with some of the conversation Morgs and I have had in the last couple of months around, probably if we're looking at critically at Rugby Australia, I was saying, I didn't feel like I understood what they were there for. I didn't understand what they were about. What's the big strategy or goals they want to go for. And I think in the speech I saw you give, you talked about taking the 2003 Wallabies to Arnhem Land to make them proud to represent all of Australia. So you're basically saying that, you're saying that getting the alignment and the vision in the organisation and making people understand where you're going is critical. Yes.
Yeah, 100%. I was just talking to a bloke. He's involved in recruitment in Germany, and he was talking about his team, and he said there's two questions you always ask, and it sums it up brilliantly. Who are we, and what do we want to be? And that should be at the forefront of your mind. And again, with Australian rugby, who are they, and who do they want to be? And then put everything, 80% of your effort into making sure that happens, and always go back to that. And I think that's definitely been lost. But it's easy to get back. If you think back 24 months ago, everyone was saying, what's going to happen to the Springboks? They were getting beaten. And people were saying, we've got to do something to look after South African rugby. The sport's dying there. 18 months later, they're the World Cup champions. They get a coach in, aligns everyone, gets the best players, goes back to playing Springbok rugby, and they win the World Cup. And so this difficult stage that Australian rugby is going through now can easily be turned around. And I think with good people involved, they will turn it around.
Yeah, and I think you've made that point a couple of times now with the Australian cricket team. The right leaders in place, winning again. What Rassie has done there, and I think that's one of the important things that Morgan and I are trying to tease out at the moment is with a lot of negativity out there. It doesn't take a lot sometimes, that just the right people in the right places to really sort of twist things in the right direction and change it up. I want to ask a little bit more about where you've got to in your coaching career, Eddie, and the lessons you've learned. I've read a couple of the things you've said lately. Interestingly, I think it was in your new podcast, the Eddie Jones Coaching Podcast. You said that you used to be obsessive, and you wanted people to be like you, and you didn't understand why they weren't. I think if I'm paraphrasing you correctly. My question to you is if Morgan Turanui was playing for you now, how different a coach would you be to what he had in 2003?
Firstly, I'd get him fit. No. Yeah, well, I think as you get older, you learn that there's many different ways to do things, and you don't need to be all like how you are. And players are different these days as well. The player groups really changed, and I think I've probably learnt to look after players more individually. And the hardest thing about coaching now is to fit the individual into the team, because everyone's more individual now. But you've got to treat them more individually, but still have a massive desire to win. And I think that comes through pretty regularly, I think. But certainly the way you manage the players, particularly now, is completely how you used to do it before. There's less do it through my energy and more how can we get more energy out of you to give to the team.
Yeah, I saw Benny. I'm going to interrupt, Benny.
Yeah.
So I saw, you talked pre-World Cup about, almost trying to make yourself redundant, players leading meetings and those sorts of things. Was that an evolution for you? Or was there a light bulb moment that sort of went, oh, you know what, I've got to pivot this way, or the current generation's different, or, this is the way coaching's going, or I want to lead coaching this way?
Yeah, well, I wanted to keep coaching because I love it, mate. I love the game and I love coaching. And probably the most important year for my coaching was coaching the Reds. I went there, they'd been third last for 3 or 4 years. And I tried to force them into a way of doing things. And we had a number of young players, and I was just too impatient with them. And we had poor results, didn't improve at all. Probably, in fact, got a little bit worse. And so I had to sit down and reflect that the problem wasn't the players, it was me. So I needed to change the way I coach. So over a period of probably 3 or 4 years, that evolved into a new style of coaching where I don't think the values that I aspire to as a coach have changed, but it's just the way you deal with people. So it's, and it's a great thing about coaching, Morgan, as you know, every day you learn, you're always aspiring to get better. I'm 60 now and I'm still trying to learn how to coach, and that's the great thing about it.
Mate, if you're still doing that, I've got a long way to go. All of us have got a long way to go.
We all got a long way to go, mate. Don't worry about it.
You'll look like Riff by the time you learn it all.
I just want to hit you with that one again, though, Eddie. What would Morgan see differently from you working for you, playing for you now, than he would have back then?
More responsibility to the players. Drive the players to take more ownership. Still trained very hard. I reckon there's 2 parts of coaching. There's one, the on the field, where your standards that you need can't change. Now, how you get those standards, before you could probably coerce a little bit more. Now you're asking the players and giving them reasons why they should work hard. And then the second part is the off field, which again is less hierarchical, more, again, giving ownership to the players to lead the program, to take it forward, and you're playing more of a guiding hand. So, again, with Morgan, Morgan used to like to eat a bit. So I'd find a new way to encourage him not to eat so much.
Yeah, well, the worst thing was, you get into me about that, and you take me for a couple of Guinnesses. It didn't help things. So come and have a beer, and I'd be worried, am I supposed to have a beer, am I not? Yeah.
Always testing, mate.
Yeah, exactly. But the other thing is, it probably wouldn't have been that different, because think about the leadership group you have in the 2003, 2005 periods. You got some strong, great leaders that led the team as well. So that would have been interesting anyway.
And again, I think that's somewhere where Australian rugby's always been strong in terms of producing leaders, because of the society that Australians lead in. I think it's encouraged players to be strong leaders, and I think that's probably an area that's maybe fallen away a little bit over the last period of time. But again, it can be picked up pretty quickly.
I'll just touch on one of the points you made a second ago there, when you said what you got wrong at the Queensland Reds, and particularly around the younger players. We had Justin Googie Harrison on last year for a chat pre his Rupa job, when he had to get to button up a bit more. But we talked about he talked about you particularly. It came up in conversation because he said you had an enormous impact on him, and he said that the mental approach to managing him was exactly right for him, with what you brought. Knowing when to joke with him, knowing when to get stuck into him, knowing how to push him or not push him was really the way he talked about it. But he actually said also that there was a perception that maybe at that period you were better with the older players than the younger players. So is that what you're also saying with the Queensland there, that you've progressed more to understand that the younger guys a bit better and to help manage them?
Yeah, no, I think that's probably why he's head of Rupa. He's a smart fellow, Cookie. No, it's a good perceptive comment. I probably didn't understand them, and probably what helped me was bringing up my daughter, which I didn't do a great job at. But she's 27 now, and so understanding that she wasn't like me, and the sort of the thought dropped, and I knew I had to treat the younger players differently, and be more engaging with them. It's not do as I tell you to do. And with the older players, you could use a range of different methods to get the best out of them. Just as Googie's saying, sometimes you're the best friend, where sometimes you get stuck in them. Whereas with the younger players now, you've got to be, I think, more of an equilibrium with them, and again allow them to be themselves more.
I'll touch on another point you've talked about before. Then the psychology of certainty. I've heard you talk about people knowing where they are and keeping people a bit uncomfortable at times. I don't know if you saw, but Matt Giteau was a guest on a chat a couple of weeks ago out of the UK, and he impersonated you as a few of your ex-players.
I think I own one, mate.
Yeah, I think you do. I think you do.
But
But I think he actually sat there and he's very complimentary, but he also said he felt nervous sitting there talking about you. Like you got him in such a state as a player, which he said ended up being a good thing, but you got him in such a state of uncertainty, or like, as Morg said before, should I have a beer? Should I not have a beer? He told the story of his 21st, when you'd said to him, don't have a beer. And then at the event, you'd gone to give him a beer. How do you read that years on, that he still sits there and nervous? Is that something that you think it worked, or how do you respond to that?
I think he probably had a few beers after I left. No, well, I think, the power of communication is establishing an emotional relationship with the players, and again, in those days, I think you could use a variety of methods, whereas these days you've got to be more straightforward with the players, and they don't tend to respond as well to those sort of variety of methods. You've got to be more straightforward. But I got sent that by about 5 people. Gets this podcast, and it's nice that he remembers it. Firstly, it shows that if you have the right conversation with players and you have that emotional attachment, they remember it their life. Like I was saying to someone the other day, of all the games I play, I can only ever remember one halftime speech, ever. And that was Bob Dwyer. Bob probably won't want me to tell this story, but I remember it clearly, that we won the minor premiership by about 12 points. We were miles better than everyone else. And for some reason, Bob decided to swap Noxie and Athura and Aquila. Athura was playing 15. He swapped Athura to 10 and put Noxie back at 15. We played Parramatta in the grand final and got beaten by 30-odd points. And at halftime, we're down 30-0. And I remember Bob at halftime, he was crying. He was saying, we can still win this game. We can still win this game. And the depth of his emotion is something that I remember today, because I know he meant a lot. It meant a lot to him, and they're the things as a coach you want to have on a player. You want them to remember that emotion of that situation. That's 30 years ago now, and I've got the picture clear in my head. It was a beautiful sunny day at Concord Oval, and we ended up getting beaten, I think 36-0 or something.
It is those moments you remember. I just want to ask you one more time, though. Was Matt Giteau supposed to drink a beer at his 21st or not?
He wasn't supposed to, mate. It was a bit of
There you go.
Don't forget, he's also the king of niggle beaver. Like, it was just, half of it was him having fun. There probably wasn't much psychology behind it. I actually remember...
That's true, too.
Yeah, there's only a couple of... I remember a few of Eddie's half-timers. The best one was, I reckon it was 2004 in France. We were playing the French Barbarians at the old Stade Jean Blanc. And we'd got beaten by the French the Saturday before, and a few blokes hadn't played well. We'd had a tough few days. The pressure was on. Matty Rogers had a stinker. We weren't playing that well in the first half, French Barbarians. And we came in at halftime. And as we're walking in, we're all going, we are going to absolutely cop it. Like, he's going to go nuts, Beaver here. And we've walked in, and it was the calmest I think Eddie's ever been up. He goes, you know what, boys? We're right. We do these 2 things, we win. And we are genuinely looking at each other, waiting for it to come, and it never came. And it was the change up that was perfect, and we flogged them in the end, as we should. They'd probably been drinking for 3 days straight, being the French Barbarians. But it's just a couple of things like that. Just the unexpected when they came, and changing things up was always interesting. I think Eddie, Gitz would have touched on it. Goog touched on it. I think every player that played under Eddie, some of us didn't realise how good he was for us as human beings until later on. In the middle, when Eddie's ripping into you for performance, effort, trainings, execution, whatever it is, keeping pressure on you, you're trying to get him through that moment to become a better player. But as you look back, I found he was the perfect person I needed. I was about to go to the Reds at the end of 2007. Eddie recruited me to go up there in 2008 when he was still the coach, because I wanted to play for him then, because he made me a better player. So I think people talk about the intense environments that Eddie creates. It's also the underlying fact that he cares about you. He cares about winning, and he wants to make you better. And if you're a coach, And if you are a player with a coach like that, it doesn't matter sometimes if you've got those few elements to it. And that's why Eddie's been successful for so long.
You watching The Last Dance on Netflix at all, Eddie?
I watched the 2 episodes today, mate.
Yeah, what do you think?
Fantastic, eh? It's great. I really enjoyed it today when Jordan's watching one of his old players. I think it was BJ Armstrong, saying, we didn't quite like him that much. He was pretty tough, and he's sitting there laughing. It's a brilliant documentary, isn't it? And probably gives you one of the best insight into how a team operates, and also the role of the coach. You could see that he was so good at keeping that complex group of players together. Like, he doesn't have a great role on the documentary, but keeping that group happy, keeping them working together, cohesion with such massive personalities, massive coaching job.
Yeah, I think the few episodes ago with Rodman, how they let him go to Vegas for 24 hours, whatever, that was really relevant. Like, you can't treat every player the same. I don't know if you would have been that lax. I don't know what would happen if you let Wendell go to Las Vegas for 48 hours. He'd never come home.
I think he went there a few times, mate.
Eddie, I thought you might want to touch on any stories from about 2003 about gambling. Any Wallabies with big bets or anything that happened around that time that you recall?
No, I can't remember anything, mate.
I'll tell the story then, because I got Morgs in the Sydney Morning Herald as a tipster for the Melbourne Cup, because I knew he was into his horses and I was writing for the Herald at the time. So I said to Morgs, be a tipster on the panel. And he's given us his first 4 picks, and they have come in first 4 order, and he's won an absolute motto. And it was in team camp, was it? Do you recall, Eddie?
Yeah. No, I think a few of the boys had a bit of a dip.
Morgs, was Eddie all right with that scenario?
Well, he was pretty good, actually. He was okay. He was quite patient because you had to wait to see who came fourth. And poor old Eddie's trying to announce the team for the quarterfinal against Scotland, go through all the tactics and that. There's a lot of punters in the room, including Phil Thompson, the team manager. So Tomo ducks out to find out who came fourth. Eddie announces the team. Right, we're going to send Sterling down the 10 channel against Scotland. This is what we're going to do, blah, blah, blah. I know, Benny, you want me to try and imitate Beaver, but I'm not doing it while he's on the line. No way.
I asked him if he'd be brave enough, Eddie. I asked him.
I make an absolute fortune speaking circuit, thanks to Eddie. But that's it. And then, so I've won 100, whatever it was, and Eddie goes, mate, just make sure you train well now. I went, it's like 21 years old. This is the best day ever. Jeremy Paul Deadset said to me, mate, the fine's only $1,000 for missing training. Just give Eddie the money and go.
Jeremy probably would have.
Yeah, he would have, definitely.
Eddie, I'll just touch on that last dance again. What did you think around Michael Jordan? Clearly an absolute champion. But he spoke very clearly about getting in his teammates' face and wanting them to be better. Did you see that or do you see it in the teams you coach? Like, how do you handle the different types of personalities and try to bring them together? And what do you think of that, players really challenging each other fiercely?
Well, that's a big thing that's changed, mate. In that first year of professional rugby, where you had guys who maybe had worked or gone to university, they were much more robust in their communication to each other. George Gregan was a terrific captain, was quite hard on his players. He actually reminded me of Jordan, and Jordan reminds me of George. He was always wanted the best for the team and demanded the best from his players. Him and Stevie used to fight each other on the field because Steve was more relaxed. Sometimes he'd bring 2 left boots to training and wouldn't be ready to train. And so they always had a bit of a battle, but George was very commanding about that. And Todai Kefu, there was a number of guys like that. Now the younger guys are less inclined to want to impose themselves on the other players, and we're actually with England we're developing that skill of being more robust on the field, because the other thing that's, I reckon, interesting in sport now, and you see it more pronounced, is because players tend to be less robust on each other on the field, you tend to see these massive momentum swings in games where teams who have been on top lose it. And because they don't have the wherewithal within the team to find a new way to go forward, because the players don't impose themselves on each other, the other team tends to have this massive momentum swing. Like, a test match rugby, if you were 14 points ahead, you never lost the test match.
Game over.
Now 14 points is nothing, because you see these massive momentum swings in games now in rugby. You see it in cricket, you see it in basketball, you see it in AFL, rugby league, you see it all the time now. And I reckon it's because the players are less tougher on each other. And I'm only talking about rugby now.
And how do you address that, mate? How do you get teams? Sorry,
Benny,
Morgs, where you go?
just quickly, right? Benny, I found that I played in a generation where the biggest thing you could be within your team was respected. And now coaching, especially sometimes Super Rugby professional places in France, a lot of the goal was to be liked. So we went from a generation of players wanting to be respected to now wanting to be liked. It's not as black and white as that, but there's that general theme within their interrelationships within the group. Everyone wants to be liked. And whether that social media has a bit of that or whatever it is. And it's interesting that Beaver's talking about having to teach, almost teach resilience, which is what we're talking about our kids as well. And we're still doing that with elite performers in their mid-20s.
Yeah, because everything's fun, mate, because you can generate fun immediately now on online. So there's a whole generation of people and players who have immediate fun. So it's always about having that immediacy of fun. So they don't want people to spoil that. And you've got to teach the players new skills. We've made a little bit of progress in that area.
Eddie, I'll take a slightly different angle on now. I'm interested in your thoughts on cohesion. We talked about 3 teams before, and the sort of numbers. How important is it when you bring a team together, as particularly at the representative levels, into the provincial teams, into the national teams? How important is it to have players who have played together know each other? Ben Darwin here in Australia with his Gainline Analytics spends a lot of time talking about cohesion. People will analyse the World Cup and say that New Zealand changed their backline more than South Africa did in heading into a World Cup. People say that one of the reasons that maybe 3 teams and those sorts of things are better is because you get more of those combinations that come through. People will also look at the Crusaders and they'll say they sit on top of the best structured, organisation in terms of numbers of strong teams feeding into each other. How much do you value those combinations? You talked about, Gregan and Larkham before. How important is that to a team these days?
I think it's really important, but there's a number of factors that control it, and it's not as straightforward as just saying cohesion's important. You look at our World Cup campaign. We played 7 games. The only time we didn't change the team was from the semi-final to the final. Every other game we changed it. So the cohesion's about the team understanding its roles, and you can do that by sometimes changing players. So I think what's important in teams is competition. You've got to be competing to be your best all the time. And that drives cohesion. So to me, the base of cohesion is competition. When you've got a squad of 30 that's really competing hard for spots, that tends to drive cohesion, because when you get your opportunity, you've got to learn to play with the other players.
Morgs, the cohesion that Benny Darwin talks about, how much did you feel as a player when you came into those Wallabies environment? How much did you have to sort of learn to play alongside people?
Well, you did with some of the key guys. Obviously, 9, 10 Gregs. The other thing about it is some players, are very like other players. Some players are sort of stock standard 10s. Stephen Larkham was a very sort of atypical 10 to play with, really different, whereas Gitz was quite easy to play with because you could sort of just work out what he's doing. Larkham ran across field probably more and more effectively than any 10 in history. Like, I'd spent my whole life being told by Alan Gaffney, Bob Dwyer, Everett Glenella, run straight. Get to the Wallabies, and Stephen Larkham was running 45 degrees across field, but doing so in such a fashion that he committed players. So he did it. It was more effective than running straight, which is everything I learned. So it took a lot of getting used to. So I can imagine playing, Greg and Larkham playing 15 years of footy together. It doesn't hurt. So when you build those things on top of each other, it just makes life easier. You're able to, predict what that guy's going to do in those sorts of situations, in support lines and things like that. If it's as simple as saying, well, you're more cohesive because you're going to win, I'm not sure. Truthfully, I'm not smart enough to work that out. I do like that the competition within groups. Everything's a competition. Everything is a game. you're learning all the time what guys are going to do in certain situations, under fatigue, under pressure, those sorts of things, as opposed to just, you know, running plays against air. There's some logic to that as well. Is it, you know, training together, there's some accumulated cohesion as well. It's pretty handy to have good players too.
Eddie, the evolution of the game, you know, from you know, those early 99 through to 2003 when Australia was very dominant, you know, yourself and Rod McQueen, you know, brought a lot of structure into the game, and people, you know, knew their job and their role. What do you see as the development of the game now? You know, we look at the way New Zealand has played. We look at the game that you brought. I think World Cups are very different. We see, you know, tighter football in World Cups. I'm not trying to be too cliched about that now, but the direction of the game. What do you think is happening with rugby at the moment? There's a lot of talk around rules and scrums and time. What's happening in the game in the world at the moment, and what are the opportunities?
Well, it's a massive power game, mate. You know, average ball in play in a tier 1 test is 35 minutes. Average ball out of play, 65 minutes. The average ball in play in a game is 42 seconds. So we're playing like it's almost like NFL with some bouts of soccer where you've got the kick, and the chaotic, which are the smaller bouts. And I think World Rugby's got a massive responsibility to make the game faster and make the game more fatiguing, because otherwise we're going to go down the line of just being a completely power game. It'll suit a certain sort of athlete, and I don't think it'll be to the benefit of the game.
And so, what's driven us there? Is it the rules, the structure, the way the coaches have started to, you know, play to the rules? What's driven us there, and how do we get away from it?
Well, I think there's a number of things. Again, it's not straightforward. HIA has increased the number of stoppages in the game, which is obviously super important. TMO has increased the stoppages in the game massively. And then you've got the referees, for some reason, allow scrums to take a lot longer time. Again, medical reason, because they want stability. Yeah, if you look at scrums 20 years ago, you used to get their pack and smash in. Yeah, and then the scrum at ball would be in and gone. Now, you can't do that anymore. And no one's saying you can. So it's all about, it takes time to get set now. And so each scrum, the lead up to the scrum's 35, 45 seconds. So there's all those bits and pieces, eight subs, so you can replace half your team in the second half again. So you got power. All those things have built a game where it's suiting the power players. So I think, you know, there are a few things that can be done very quickly to change that, which will be for the benefit of the game.
You actually said, I think, last week that, you know, part of the play out from this pandemic will be there'll be a different way that game gets approached. And I apologize, I don't know the context that you were talking in, but I think you talked about squads getting smaller and more multi-skilled players. What was that in regards to, mate?
Yeah, well, I think we should cut down the subs to 6, which would put a different aspect on the game. So imagine you carry 3 front rows, 1 locker can play back row, 1 half back, and then a backline player that can cover from 10 to 15. And it certainly make it a more fatiguing game, because you wouldn't get that half the team being replaced. I think we could look at how we can reset the set piece quicker, and that'll improve the fatigue of the game. But I think the other part with the pandemic is that obviously the finance of the game is going to change considerably. And I think we're going to need to have smaller squads, smaller staffs, because that's the only thing that's going to be able to be done given the circumstances.
Mate, I think that's exactly what you're sort of saying before, what we were saying, which is that's the opportunity, isn't it? It's the real opportunity now in a crisis to say what could or should be better about our game. So everything should be on the table, shouldn't it?
Yeah, 100%. And I think we've got to look at the game itself. How can we make the game better? And then, you know, as we've been talking about for Australian rugby, what's the opportunity then to create the best game for Australia? And yeah, we're looking at it. We've spent the last 6 weeks with the England coaching staff looking at what we've got to do to make the game better for us over the next period of time.
Is there an appetite, do you think, within the home unions and then World Rugby for that change? Or they think, well, the game's pretty healthy over there. Six Nations is huge. Are they pretty happy with the game, or are they looking to do that sort of evolution of the game?
Well, I think there's just this constant battle everywhere you go, mate, whether it be in Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Ireland, England, between the wants of the domestic competition, the wants of the international competition, the welfare of the players, and then you got the finance. So it's trying to get all of those to fit together. I think they're generally around the world, there's an appetite to fix the game at the moment. Guys, I'm going to have to go now.
No worries, Eddie. Look, we really do appreciate your time, mate.
Yeah, pleasure.
That conversation. Great to see you fit
All
well.
right.
Stay that way. We'll get you on another time.
Keep
Thanks,
well,
mate.
guys.
Talk to you
See
soon.
you, boys. Cheers.
See you, mate.
See you, mate. Well, there you go. Morgs, plenty in that conversation. What did you think, mate? He's looking well?
Well, he's pretty kind. Mate, he's a guru. Like, he is a gun. And the last question I wanted to say to him is, mate, when you're done with England, will you put your hand up?
Yeah. Well,
and we'll get him. We'll get him again.
I was going to ask him that question too, if there was a facet or a way in which he could see him returning to the country and being involved. Because, we've talked about guys not in the game. We've had Fraser Neal on. We've talked about Ewan McKenzie. Getting the likes of Eddie Jones back involved at some stage would be an excellent thing for Rugby Australia. The amount of knowledge and experience that he has is just outstanding. All right, Morgs, anything to close on, mate?
Well, there's plenty to digest there. Some of the cut-through things are interesting in that we've sort of skirted around for a few weeks of that, and that I do agree that it's overly simplistic to say that we're too focused on the Wallabies, or it's not all about the Wallabies. The harsh truth is that there is a decent chance that in pure black and white, logically, that it is so much about the Wallabies because everything else gets dragged up with it. Now, I think I agree with everyone saying that, look, it hasn't been done efficiently enough providing an environment where the Wallabies can succeed, and there has been wastage of money, talent, personnel, all those sorts of things, and we need to find a better way to do it. But I don't think we just go, you know what, forget about the Wallabies, let's just worry about every kid playing it. I think that they are the community game and the Wallabies have a symbiotic relationship. Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely, it's both. You can't say the Wallabies win and everything's right. The Wallabies don't win unless they're built on strong foundations. Yeah. You get the foundations right, the Wallabies win, and it grows the foundations. So it is absolutely a symbiotic relationship. And I think one of the key things that Eddie was saying in there, and it is fascinating to hear him talk about the application of the way he thinks about the team and bringing a team together and growing the team and applying it to business. And it does come down to leadership. There's a leadership gap there right now. Rob Clark has stepped in. He said he's only there for a short period of time. We're waiting on a new chairman. We're waiting on a new CEO. But also, as Eddie was just saying then, and talking about these other sports, the right people in place can turn things around. There are absolutely issues to solve, but what we want to see is that vision, that alignment, and everyone on the right page, pulling together, and something good will come of it.
Yeah, and you make an interesting point there that we have an interim chairman and an interim CEO that will make some of the biggest decisions in the history of the game. And Paul McLean, classic Wallaby, trusted member of rugby community, we'll deal with everything with integrity. Rob Clark, smart operator, former COO, knows it, has relationship with government, has it with broadcast, has it with states. If you're in rugby long enough, you make enemies and you make friends. So it depends who's who. So, but those two guys will be part of some huge decisions for the game. And then other people will be coming in to deliver it. So it's a really interesting time. And once again, another person saying, let's not waste this crisis. This crisis is an opportunity.
And as I said about Rob Clark being in that role, it made me feel more comfortable that there was that figure put in place, and that's someone who has the experience of Rob. So let's look forward to see what he can do for the game in the next short period of time. All right, Morgs, that'll do it, mate. We thank Eddie Jones. Fantastic chat, and I tell you what, you'd love to have a couple of beers and drag out some of the stories about the Wallabies when you played for a mate, and hear him talk through some of those days. Be very interesting indeed.
Yeah, well, I'll definitely be doing that, but I'll be drinking pure blondes. I'll be making sure they're low carb beers. You don't want to give him any more ammo than he needs. Like one of the funniest, most ruthless blokes. Hilarious.
There you go. That was the latest in our Three Things podcast. We didn't exactly nail Eddie down to three things, but I think there was plenty in there that is worth talking about in Australian rugby. So please share it out to your friends. Get to the rugbyruckus.com, post your comments, and we will speak to you next time.